Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Tanya Schrum, and we are joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and our arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome to you both.
Good to see you.
Tanya, happy Halloween Eve. How you doing?
I am doing great, and happy Halloween Eve to you and to everybody in our community. I hope we all have wonderful plans in the rain.
I do want to give a shout out. We have spoken about this before, but the delightful Mark Boyd, who does our, what are they called? The ads in the back, the classified ads in the paper. Sorry, it's hard to think because he scared the bejesus out of me a couple of times this week. He does not just dress up for Halloween. Oh, do you dress up for Halloween? That's adorable. He dresses up pretty much on and off the entire month of October, but you don't know when. And so yesterday I was coming up the stairs and actually listening to a scary story on my headphones, and all of a sudden, giant, terrifying scarecrow monster peeks out of the conference room. And did I scream in an undignified way? Maybe. But cheers to Mark and all you other Halloween freaks keeping it spooky all year.
Absolutely. Stay safe, but stay scary, y'all. And with that, we're going to talk about some important stuff happening this week that isn't as spooky. First, we have our cover story. Thad, are you going to fill us in on all the not so scary details?
Absolutely, yeah. We have some good news on the cover this week. A story that's kind of updating folks on efforts at Eureka City Schools to kind of foster an environment that's more inclusive, representative, and supportive of Native students. So folks who've been reading the journal for a while, up here for a while, may remember that back in 2013, the ACLU of Northern California filed a pretty scathing lawsuit against Eureka City Schools, alleging kind of a variety of civil rights violations, and basically the core allegation was that they had fostered an environment that allowed racial and sexist bullying to occur. But one of the core kind of allegations that stuck with me also is that they had a Native American representations of Native American history in their curriculum that were just incorrect and also reinforced negative stereotypes. And of course, in a area with not just as rich a history of Native culture as we have on the North Coast, but also as rich a current culture of various tribes that are all very active and stuff. That the ACLU just rightly pointed out that this is kind of especially egregious. And so then fast forward, there was that case settled. There was a settlement agreement laying out kind of a variety of goals that Eureka City Schools and the ACLU would work toward to improve conditions. And then in 2020, the ACLU followed up with that with a landmark report called Failing Grades that really assessed educational outcome disparities between Native and non-Native students throughout all of Humboldt County. And that obviously included Eureka City Schools. And what the report did was really, first and foremost, what it did was kind of quantified a problem that everybody who was paying attention knew was there and kind of knew was not getting addressed. But it really put numbers behind it, finding that, in categories as far as like English language proficiency and math, that in many cases Native students were kind of grading out or testing at kind of half the scores of non-Native counterparts, and while also facing disparate school disciplinary procedures and stuff like that. But I think very importantly also that report kind of outlined 11 steps that school districts could kind of proactively take to really start to address the situation. So we reported back on that in early 2020, and then there was a pandemic and all kinds of things happened, and we kind of honestly lost track of it. And I was covering some issues with the former Jacobs School property in Eureka City Schools and a now defunct sales agreement. And I happened to be at an ECS board meeting when Superintendent Gary Storch just kind of mentioned offhandedly in his report to the board that he was going to be traveling to attend a Native Education conference and co-presenting with the ACLU and the Northern California Indian Development Council. And it just kind of caught my ear. I was like, what, like they're presenting together? That seems unusual. And so I followed up with him, and what I found is that especially that failing grades report has really resulted in has really led Eureka City Schools on a path of creating just a much more nurturing and supportive environment and a curriculum that much better reflects and supports Native students and their lived experiences. And so this story is just kind of diving into that, talking to the ACLU, talking to Eureka City Schools about this effort and kind of how it came to be and then what it looks like in practice.
And although this is a fairly new situation, they already seem to be getting positive results. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, definitely getting positive feedback. It's pretty much too early to really tell if it's moving the needle as far as test scores and educational outcomes. And the last year for which data is available, or full data is available, which I believe was the 22-23 school year, the ACLU said there are still disparate disciplinary outcomes. So remains very much a work in progress. And everybody I spoke to agrees that this isn't done and they haven't crossed the finish line and aren't celebrating. But they are receiving very positive feedback from Native families and Native community organizations, whether it be tribes or folks like NCIDC, who are actively working to kind of improve these conditions.
That's amazing. I mean, there's nothing better than hearing about a problem that exists and that people are taking positive steps to remedy them.
Yeah, it was really heartening. And I was, as a reporter, we're always a little bit suspect and, a little bit, kind of maybe trust but verify. And so I had talked to Gary Storch, the superintendent at Eureka City Schools, and some folks from the ACLU, and read some of the stuff that NCIDC had put out about kind of this joint collaborative effort. And I was still admittedly a bit skeptical of just kind of how much this was trickling down. I believe that the effort was there, but I didn't know how much kind of the results were showing. And I got the chance to catch up with a woman, Desiree Rivas, who is has helped raise 7 of her siblings, and currently has her youngest brother is a senior at Eureka City Schools. And so she and her family moved to Humboldt County in 2010, and so really have kind of been involved in Eureka City Schools throughout this process, really since before the first ACLU lawsuit was filed. And she was really positive. She was saying, yes, there's more work to be done, and there's things she'd like to see, including, just everything from more tutors to more representation in standard curriculum to a special kind of Native American Studies course. But she said the difference is just really, really palpable, and made kind of few bones of feeling like her interactions with staff and teachers early on in her interactions with Eureka City Schools really left her feeling that there were tints of racism, and at the very least kind of a lack of cultural sensitivity and understanding. And she feels like that's really changed, and she's just really heartened that her brother Adriano is involved in the Native American Club on campus now. He's taken Yurok language classes. He has found people on campus that he feels like are Native mentors for him, and she was just kind of very, very pleased with the experience he's had in kind of comparison to some of his older siblings who also went through Eureka City Schools.
That is just a wonderful story, and I encourage everybody to read the entire thing to get all the details. Before we move on, and I know we're going to pivot back to you for a couple other stories, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, two things I really want to highlight is one, and this isn't actually in our cover story, but it's in another news story that's in this week's journal. Last week was kind of a landmark moment in Indian education in the United States. President Joe Biden issued a formal apology for boarding schools and the implementation of boarding schools that, of course, took Native children away from their families, tried to strip them their language, culture, and sovereignty. And so that was really a profound moment in Native communities, just to finally get that official recognition and apology, which was long overdue. And it really spoke to me as I was kind of putting together this cover story, and it really related to some of the things that Sunny Tripp, who is the Native Education Coordinator for NCIDC, said just about kind of how tied these disparate outcomes that we're seeing today are to that legacy of Indian boarding schools. And the very understandable distrust that fostered in communities about our education system, and the need for schools, for school districts to really proactively work to repair that trust in those relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful story, Thad, and thank you for reporting on it.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to shift over to Jennifer that has some not only discussion about fall, but discussion about some spookiness.
Yes, I love when Simona goes for walks in the woods. This week we've got a Fall in the Redwoods story from Simona Carini in our Get Out column, which you may have noticed over the years has gotten broader. We include things like hiking, we include going to festivals, we include something that happened outside over the weekend, or doing some sort of activity that might be real physical but not necessarily outdoors. Like, I look back fondly on Louisa Rogers' laughing yoga class, which I might need soon. So this week, Simona is taking us on a tour through the Prairie Creek Redwoods State Park on the James Irvine Trail. And she talks about how you can sort of gauge the distance you want, how far you're willing to go out, because you can sort of go out and back, or take this loop. And she has some really great information about things like they've removed some footbridges for the season and where to go and who to contact. But she also had an unnerving and, dare I say, spooky experience, which is walking through the redwoods amid these ancient trees and hearing a high, shrieking, non-human sound. Unlike me, because the rest of the story would have been about running back to the parking lot, Simona investigated, and she found that it was in fact Roosevelt elk bulls locking horns in the most literal possible way. So that sound you heard, in case you, like me, all of a sudden went full Usain Bolt back to the car, turns out to be the sound that the elk make, which sounds kind of like those crazy multi-tone singers. Honestly, it sounds terrible. Nature is not always nice, but they whack into each other with their horns and whatnot, and it's just part of the season of fall. And she talks about what she learned there about the elk, and with her it's always fun because she's so curious about the outside world, and I always enjoy that. So a couple recommendations. One, read her story because she always makes you look anew at the world. And also, it's going to be a stressful week. We've got election day coming. Let me just...
I think we all need time in nature to ground.
We need to do some very serious forest bathing. And if you need to scream somewhere, people might just think it's an elk.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also, I will pivot over to Linda Stansberry's Seriously column this week, which is very spooky season focused and grew out of a conversation we had on a walk. It is called Embracing Monsterpause. We had been talking about, I don't know how many of you are experiencing this out in radio and TV land, but For women of a certain age, it becomes imperative to control your temperature, to, not do murder, all those things. They're related to hormonal shifts. And bless the medical industry, they have named perimenopause, premenopause, and menopause, followed by, wait for it, postmenopause, which is when JD Vance says you need to just be taking care of your grandkids. So we talked about how when you're in this whole sort of multi-decade period of life, when you go to the doctor and you say something like, so last night I actually burst into flames, or I now crave human blood, they kind of look at you and say, that's probably the change of life. And it's maddening. But we started talking about well, what are the difference between the symptoms of, say, vampirism, turning into a werewolf, being bitten by a zombie, and menopause? And she came up with this fantastic piece about embracing Monsterpause, and how maybe instead of doing expensive and sometimes not so great hormone therapies, not for everyone, think about becoming a werewolf and maybe discovering that now paleo works for you. You're finally getting that muscle definition you worked so hard for in your 20s and could never achieve. She goes over some possibilities for, say, zombieism, which if you are already working and taking care of kids and also taking care of a spouse and possibly your elder parents, you might be halfway to zombie land anyway. But she's delightful as always, and it's very funny. I encourage everyone to give it a read, and feel free to turn down that thermostat.
Oh, I definitely enjoyed it. It gave me quite a giggle as a woman in that threshold. And so, Jen, before we pivot back to Thad, what monster would you choose?
It's hard to top for someone who is already, a little pale. It's hard to top vampirism. You're no longer debating, what am I going to eat for dinner when I get home? People, it's people.
It's people.
And you just have good skin forever. So yeah, I'm in. I'm sold.
She's in. I definitely chose werewolf.
You are a dog lover.
I'm a dog lover, and chin hairs are part of my Mediterranean heritage, so I'm all in.
Congratulations.
But the fleas. Oh, thank you so much, Jen. I hope you also have a wonderful Devil's Night. And with that, we're going to pivot back to Thad to go over some stories that didn't quite make it in time last week. Thad, do you want to fill us in?
Yeah, definitely. We have an update this week on the kind of landmark lawsuit the California Attorney General's office has brought against Providence St. Joseph Hospital regarding its alleged denial of emergent abortion care to a woman in need back in February. So that case involves a woman who was 15 weeks pregnant with twins, was suffering complications, went into the emergency room at St. Joe's, and basically was told by the physician, according to the complaint, that both fetuses were non-viable, but because they still had a registerable heartbeat, the doctor felt she couldn't perform the necessary abortion procedure at that point, and the woman ended up being transferred to, discharged and driven to Mad River Community Hospital, where the procedure was performed. And according to a doctor's declaration there, when she showed up there, she was deteriorating and in very, very bad shape, and it could have been a much, much worse and more tragic outcome. So the Attorney General's office filed this lawsuit against St. Joe's, and earlier this week, kind of as we were going to press, we got word that the parties had filed a joint stipulation, and so this is kind of a proposed stipulation that'll go before a judge who may or may not sign it to make it an order. They're usually signed because both parties in the case agree to them, but this basically says that it doesn't settle the case. It doesn't, St. Joe's is still kind of denying the allegations, and the AG's office is still moving forward with the complaint. family. But what this does is kind of says going forward that Providence St. Joseph Hospital pledges to follow state law when it comes to emergency pregnancy services, which include a requirement that hospitals offer necessary procedures to pregnant folks who are kind of in imminent danger of health complications. And so not just kind of when they're on the cusp of death and an abortion is the only thing that will save them, but actually when they are in danger of really debilitating health issues. And so St. Joseph, in the stipulation, St. Joseph pledges to do this, not only to do this, but also to kind of print out the stipulation and hand it to every member of its staff and all of its practicing physicians there. So seems like, assuming the judge signs it and it goes into effect, a very good first step in resolving the situation.
Yes, I mean, that's definitely, a concern as you've reported that they're the only game in obstetrics left in town. So it's definitely something that we need to make sure that women have access to proper care.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as the lawsuit, affirms, kind of all the more important with Mad River Community Hospital closing its birthing center this week. As you said, definitely leave St. Joseph as the only game in town.
All right. And then you also have a story on the biomass plant that we were beginning to tease last week.
Yeah, so this is not kind of inherently a Humboldt County story, but Humboldt is definitely connected, basically through the Rural California Representatives Coalition or something like that. It's RCRC. It's essentially kind of the lobbying organization on behalf of rural counties, of which Humboldt and 39 other counties are members. Our representative to that board is First District Supervisor Rex Bone. And RCRC some years ago formed a subsidiary group, a nonprofit public interest corporation, Golden State Natural Resources, which is pursuing this massive biomass project. And basically what it would do is create pellet plants, plants that manufacture wood pellets, one in Tuolumne and one in Lassen County, I believe. And they would draw wood waste from kind of surrounding forests, turn them into pellets there, and then ship them on trains to the Port of Stockton, where they would be loaded on barges and shipped overseas to be burnt in what used to be coal power plants, but are now transitioning to biomass power plants. It's being billed as this way to kind of clear out wood debris in the forests, decrease accumulated fuel loads, and then decrease, the risks of catastrophic wildfires in these communities. But environmentalists have a whole wide host of concerns about this. Everything from it becoming a tail wagging dog situation where these plants need so much wood waste that they're actually proactively logging in certain forests to create it, to just the emissions of shipping the stuff all over the place, to the very basic idea of, is biomass a renewable or green energy, or is it just pumping more CO2 and emissions into the air? All these things are hotly debated. So basically, Golden State Natural Resources, the EIR, the Draft Environmental Impact Report for its project, was just released, and it had kind of set out a 60-day public comment period, and some folks, and now the Board of Supervisors agrees that was just too short with the selection looming, with the holidays coming. So the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors did this week is agreed to send a formal letter to the Golden State Natural Resources Board asking them to extend that by 30 days. So it would go into January, allow us all to get through Election Day, get through holidays, and then read this 1,300-page document that tries to assess the environmental impacts of the project.
All right. Well, I definitely look forward to learning more about it. It's fascinating, but it definitely sounds like there's a whole host of questions involved.
I have not read all 1,300 pages yet, Tanya, but I'll have to get back to you on that.
All right. Well, thank you, Thad, and thank you, Jennifer. That wraps up our time for this week. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now, or, of course, you can go online and read everything at northcoastjournal.com. I am Tanya Schrum. Thanks for being with us and staying extra spooky here in our North Coast community.